Dr. Zero right now will go to Västerås, a small city in Sweden, to talk to senior lecturer Professor Kamran Namdar. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be with you.
Thank you very much for joining. This is the second time you come, and we had very nice, fruitful discussion. So right now, my question is, we had this pandemic, and we started to reflect about many things in our lives, and then education system has changed also. What did we learn from this pandemic, from the perspective of education?
Yes, that's a very good question, and maybe even not just what have we learned, or rather, what should we learn from this pandemic? What is the message that it brings us? Um, I think there are a few important points. One thing that we have, I think, understood in connection with this pandemic is that it is something that uh, affects and touches us all human beings all around the world. And not just that it affects us, as it were, separately, but as a interwoven global system, as humanity, really. Um, and I was just listening recently, as you probably have also, to the Secretary General of the United Nations, who was talking about the fact that if you don't see to it, that this pandemic is taken care of all around the world. If you only focus on our own countries, that being the richer countries, then that will actually sort of come back to us. So there is no, as it were, selfish solution to this
Mm-hmm.
situation. So I think what this pandemic should have helped us realize, if you haven't done it yet, is that in our development as humankind, we have come to a point where we are really an mutually interdependent entity, that we are really, as humanity, like a human body, where all the different organs and cells are interrelated. And you cannot say that, okay, as long as my little finger is healthy, it doesn't matter if the rest of my body is dying of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a very silly way of thinking. But unfortunately, traditionally, our societal and political thinking is very much based on, at the very best, on this idea of a national, um, our national well-being being, and our national prosperity being the most important consideration.
If you need to take the
So
phone, if you need to
yeah,
take the phone,
sorry.
take the phone. No problem. I will cut
Yeah.
it.
No. I don't want to take the phone. I just want to make it
Yeah.
quiet. I'm sorry.
Start from
Do you
no no
want
from
what's to take us again? Because
not
I'm so
everything,
sorry. I
but
didn't realize it.
no problem. You can take from the when it start to ring from there. Start it a little bit before. I will cut it. I will embed it. Don't worry. No stress.
Okay, I don't remember exactly what I
You
said,
said
but
we cannot be we cannot only finger one finger. We cannot say
of our own country. Yeah,
selfish.
just a second.
Yes.
Yeah, I will just make sure that I'm very sorry. I will make sure the
No
telephone is
problem.
uh, off. Just 1 second, please. Ah,
You use the phone. Okay.
no, it's no. I'm not using the phone. I just want to be able to move around here. Okay, now the telephone should be silenced. Okay. Yeah, so I think that if you haven't realized it yet, this pandemic should have made it clear to us that in our development as humankind, we have come to a point where we really are interdependent. We are one interdependent entity, very much like the human body, where the different organs and cells are all dependent on each other. And you cannot think that, okay, as long as my little finger is fine, the heck with the rest of the body. That would be a very silly way of thinking, but yet that is the kind of logic that we are still used to, thinking of the well-being of our own people, our own nation, in the first instance, and thinking that prioritizing that or ensuring that, even at the cost of the well-being of others, would bring us prosperity and happiness. And even in the most superficial sense, that is not true.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is one of the very important messages for our educational system, that it should prioritize um, imparting to young people, to the young generation, a sense of uh, oneness of humanity,
Mm-hmm.
of global solidarity, of the fact that we are all really citizens of one world. One could even say that in many senses, the world has become like, or we should look at the world as one country, and that we are all citizens of this one
Mm-hmm.
country, one that entity called Earth. Now, this is of course as I mentioned, it's a vision, it's an understanding that is not directly linked to the existing reality. Now, it's very interesting that if you think of the origins of mass education in the West, which started in the middle of the 19th century in Europe and then in America, and then it spread around the world. Now, one of the main purposes of this mass education was actually to consolidate the nation state. In Europe,
Mm.
some of the remarkable nation states were quite young, for instance, Germany or Italy at that time. But anyway, I mean, all nation states, they existed, but they wanted to use public education as a means of consolidating the loyalty of the citizens. That's why, um, you know, love
Interesting.
for your country and loyalty to the king, these were very central themes in public education. So, and even when democracy became an issue, well, there was a democratic system that was maybe, for instance, in America, was John Dewey, a very famous educational philosopher, spoke very much about the importance of education in strengthening democracy, because democracy was still relatively new in that country. But but the whole point was that there was a societal system, and public education was used to consolidate it and confirm it. Now,
Wow. So
today,
it is
I
not
think
to
there are
educate them, train them, but it is to make them loyal to the state, and maybe
yes,
even.
and make them, yes, and make them um, adjust and adjust to the existing system and to maintain the existing system. Now this, I think this sort of approach has remained with schools up to our days. And even today, we are, in the best case, we are educating the young generation in order to fit into the society that exists. So,
And,
so
mhm.
we want them to become later on adults that will function in the kind of democracy that we happen to have in our country. We promise them that if they come to our school, they will get good training, and then they go on to university. And universities also, they try to attract students by saying that, if you come to our university, you have a very high chance of getting a good job at the end.
Mhm.
So it's all like we are trying to produce these very well polished and fine cogs for an existing machinery. And I think that the challenge that we are in, and the great task and opportunity and potential that the educational system is facing today, is to do exactly the opposite, is to become, and this is a vision that great educational thinkers, in a way, even from the times of Plato, but certainly people like Comenius, or later on the so-called reconstructivist educationalists such as Theodor Bramwell, and in fact, as close to our own days as in the 60s, the well-known Swedish political figure Olof Palme, who in
Mm-hmm.
those days was a young minister of education. He sort of coined this phrase of schools being spearheads of development. So the
Mm-hmm.
idea was that what we needed in society was not reproduction. It wasn't um, producing a generation that would adapt to and adjust to the existing system, but rather that schools should become arenas for transformation, for reconstruction, for
In
building a
in
new kind of a world.
in innovation, like we use the term destructive, constructive destruction. So maybe there should be
Yes,
or
exactly.
constructive disruption also. Something should be disrupted so that we can have something constructive. But right now, you're right. We are just asking people to do some stuff to enter this machinery while we complain about the machinery. But if everybody becomes tools of this machinery, how can we change the machinery?
Fantastic. This is exactly the issue. And you see, today with this pandemic, very many people are saying, okay, let's get the vaccines or whatever, so we can go back to how the situation was before the pandemic, sort of
Yes.
back to the old normal. But I think that would be the worst thing that could happen. Because if that old normal had been a very well functioning setup, then we wouldn't had the pandemic the way we have it today. Because the way, I mean, one of the reasons why the pandemic has become so deadly and out of control is that our societies, neither individually and especially not collectively, are not functioning the way they should.
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely don't want to go back to what we had before the pandemic, but we rather want to see what can we learn from this pandemic and create a future that is going to be much better and different from the past. So, so this transformative um, task of education, to me, is the central issue, and the realization that as humanity we have really come to a turning point. It's impossible, you know. And for instance, this young Swedish girl, Greta Thunberg, who
Yes.
has become world famous. This is something that she, as a teenager, understands so well, and she's trying to put it across to adults in positions of power who totally resist it, and she becomes so frustrated because this is exactly what she's saying. She's saying, wake up. We cannot continue anymore along those same lines. More of the same, even in refined forms, is suicidal. We have come to a turning point. We need to change things, and we need to change them fundamentally, not just,
If Mhm.
innovations and creativity within the existing system. We need innovations and creativity that, as you said, is like system breaking or system changing, just system transforming.
Mhm.
So, to use an analogy or a terminology from physical science, we've come to a bifurcation point,
Mhm.
which means that we have come to a point in our development where we cannot continue any longer along the same line as we have been and as that we are currently pursuing. We have
Nature is
two.
reminding us, isn't it? It is enough. Climate change,
Exactly,
environmental
exactly, exactly.
disasters, this virus,
It's
wake up. These are all
beautiful,
signals of wake
beautiful,
up.
fantastic. Exactly, beautifully put, beautifully put. Exactly, they are the alarm clocks. And this is in itself very fascinating, I think, that today we live in a world. I often think that if someone would come from outer space, some intelligent life form, and would look at us as humanity. Sometimes people think that I may be an alien because I look like it, but
No,
I'm
you're
not. But I
not.
try to take, I
But
try,
you think like an
I try to
alien.
take. Yes, I say, I try to take their perspective. I think they would be very confused because they would look at humanity and they would look and they would see that, my goodness, we have so much knowledge, we have so much science, we have so much technology. I know it's almost incomprehensible. It is incomprehensible that all our knowledge doubles every 12 hours
It is
currently.
interesting, yeah.
So I mean
The
the
data,
amount of
knowledge.
knowledge and science that we have is just like huge. And then we look at around us and we see that we still have unresolved problems from centuries back. We have poverty, we have
Mhm.
tremendous injustice, we have hunger, we have wars. And then, as you said, added to that it looks like partially, of course, our science and technology has solved many things, but not everything, not sufficiently. And in addition to what it hasn't solved, it has actually, like sometimes your body has this autoimmune reaction where it sort of
Mm-hmm.
turns against itself. And in many ways, our science and technology have turned against us because
Mm-hmm.
exactly as you said, if you think of this environmental destruction, or if you think of weapons of mass destruction, even if you think of the overuse of social media and so forth, well, these are things which are not healthy for humanity, and yet these were not developed by some, wild primitive tribe somewhere in the world. So
Highly
I think the
educated people.
question,
Mm-hmm.
exactly, highly intelligent, highly educated people. And so I think the question then becomes like, what is missing here? And I think to me, it's very obvious what is missing. I think that the thing that is missing is an ethical, one could even maybe say a spiritual, anyway, an existential perspective. Because because I sometimes think that science is like a sharp knife. And you
Mm-hmm.
can ask the question of, is a sharp knife a good thing or a bad thing?
It depends how you use, isn't it?
Beautiful. Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. In the hands of a murderer, it's a very bad thing. In the hands of a surgeon, it's a very good thing. It can save a life. So just standing in every street corner and giving out sharp knives to people is not maybe the solution. And
I
so
understand.
this the idea of just giving people knowledge. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't give people knowledge. Of course, we should give people knowledge, but we should also teach them how to use this knowledge. Because this knowledge, without a compass,
Mm-hmm.
without something that gives it true direction, that makes it a servant of human flourishing and human development, can actually turn against us. And I think this is what we lack generally in the world today and in our educational system, is sufficient attention to, or even clarity about, what are those ethical, what are those existential principles
Yeah.
that
Thank you
should
very
be the
much.
foundation.
Yeah, thank you very much. It seems we need to reflect upon the way that we educate, the society that we build, and how should we train ethically that will have a unity. It is great to have you. Looking forward to have you as a guest. I really appreciate that you contribute with your knowledge, with your experience. Greetings to Westeros.
Thank you so much for having me. All the best. Bye bye.
Bye.